Welcome back to Two Who's Review, the Doctor Who podcast. I'm Alex,
I'm Fitz.
and today we're going to be discussing the classic series story, The Sea Devils.
Oh boy.
So this is the first episode of Doctor Who that we're reviewing for this that I hadn't seen prior to deciding to review it.
Mm-hmm.
So this is my first truly fresh experience.
Oh, this is going to be interesting.
Yeah, you're about to see it's truly a newcomer's perspective to this episode.
Oh man, and what a great experience for a newbie. It's got all those classic Doctor Who hallmarks. Some great, some not so great. We'll get into all of that.
How many times have you seen this episode prior to today?
Well, that's the interesting thing, because it would be a couple, because I had it on DVD with the Silurian Sea Devils DVD set, which I think it's the one I gave you a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So I've certainly seen it, but I had not seen it for years before I watched it yesterday, and I chose it because I thought, oh yeah, it's got all those great hallmarks of classic Who. Yeah, it's really wacky, and the weird synth stings are just really bizarre. It had been a while since I'd seen it, and I chose it because it's got all the wacky things like the weird synth stings and the sort of cheap special effects. Although there is actually one special effect that I'm surprised looked as good as it did, and we'll get into that later on.
Yeah.
It's the melting door. Spoiler alert.
Oh yeah, that looks great.
Yeah, for 1972 with Doctor Who, holy hell, that I couldn't believe how good that looked. Anyway, so all of that. But the main reason why I chose it was because, I remember, it's got some really cool kind of sort of ethical conundrums for the Doctor, because he tries to broker a peace between the Sea Devils and the humans, and he wants to obviously learn from his mistakes from the last time he encountered, the Silurians and the Sea Devils are kind of part of the same group of people. That's how they're framed in the TV show, anyway. Because at the end of Doctor Who and the Silurians, spoiler alert, the Brigadier basically bombs the underground caverns where the Silurians live and basically wipes them out. And it's quite tragic and pretty poignant. And I remembered from watching it years ago, they've got all these great sort of conflicts between the Doctor and the military personnel. There's some great bits of dialogue between the Doctor and the private parliamentary secretary. I love the bit where he's like, I'm paraphrasing slightly here, but he says, I know there's only one way to deal with these sorts of problems. You just blow them out of the water, and then immediately says, now where's that go with my tea and biscuits?
That is such a weird, the extreme close-up on his mouth as he's doing it, as he says that. I was like, this is a bold choice, and I respect you for it, Michael E. Bryant, but I wouldn't have done that.
I look it up. I quite like it, because it's kind of, I don't know, it's almost like a symbol for really really British kind of imperialist attitude, but to immediately follow yellow to blow them up with tea and biscuits, and to just have that creepy close-up of his mouth. It just kind of, I love that. There's a meatiness to those kinds of dialogues and those kinds of exchanges. So I thought, and it'll be really interesting to see how Doctor Who tackles these ethical issues, and when, by the time it gets to the end, when the Doctor brokers that peace, it's going to be really emotionally satisfying and great, and fantastic. So I watched it again, and I was waiting for the peace to be brokered, and waiting, and reminding myself, yeah, I kind of remember this one bit where, the Master and the Doctor, they're, trapped in the Sea Devil's base, and then he mentions reversing the polarity of the neutron flow, and incidentally, I'm pretty sure this is the first episode where that little meme was mentioned.
Really?
Yeah, it's mentioned several times afterwards in the classic series. I'm pretty sure it's in the Five Doctors, for example. Anyway, so but then I'm looking at the timestamp for it, and I'm like, man, we're getting really close to the end and they're still on the ship and the weird bomb thing that the doctor's basically just given them, that's gonna go off in a few seconds. What's going on there? And then the master, the master, when he realizes that the doctor's deliberately, basically put like a kill switch mechanism in this power module that he's given the Sea Devils, the master literally says to him, "Do you know what you've just done?" And the doctor's like, "Yes, I do." And then he basically just admits, "Yeah, the reason why I'm doing this is so, I can manipulate you to help me get out of here because either both of us are getting out of here or neither of us are getting out of here." They leave. The 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 base explodes. The doctor gets back, and once that happens, once these sea devils have been massacred, he just stands there on the beach and basically just says, "I did what I had to do in the name of peace." And I'm like, Excuse me, old man."
We'll have a longer discussion about that later.
Oh yeah,
because
we will.
I have my own things to say about that as well. But,
I'm very curious to see what you have to say about that.
But we should mention the other reason that we're doing this episode specifically. As the day we're recording this is exactly 2 weeks before the new special comes out, The Legend of the Sea Devils. But when you're hearing this, the episode will likely have already been released. And next week we're going to look at that episode, specifically the newest episode of Doctor Who as at the time of that episode's release. So we thought it would be interesting to have sort of a more direct comparison between how they've been written in the 70s and how they're going to be written in the 20s. I think it is almost like this story came out in February to March 1972. So it is a little over 50 years since that episode came out.
I think I watched it recently. I watched the whole thing in one sitting, and I watched it, I'm pretty sure it was the 50th anniversary of the air date of part 6, so that just made me laugh. That was... Anyway, that's just a funny little tidbit there.
Let's do our traditional time scales, reviewing the rankings on the time scales, basically.
By the way, just one small thing. I just found it very funny that you said, yeah, it'll be really interesting compared to how they did it in the 70s compared to how they did it in the 20s.
Yeah, I know, remembered.
Oh, that's right. We're in the 2020s. Anyway, that's just a weird thing from me.
Okay, so out of 142 votes on the timescales, this episode has an average rating of 7.9 out of 10, which I think is pretty spot on.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I really ended up enjoying this story quite a lot by the end.
Fair enough. I have some mixed feelings about it, but we'll get into that.
It has a 7.7 for plot.
Yeah, especially given it's a 6-parter. I don't think...
Yeah.
I think it all kind of works together. It's pretty cohesive.
Yeah, I mean, around about the middle of episode 3, I was kind of had my reservations being like, okay, this is a story called The Sea Devils, and yet, like, they've only really appeared very briefly in episode 1, and the Master's been a massive focus. And even when I finished watching it, I was like, okay, you didn't really need the Master in this story, though. But, like, having that conversation with you just in the middle of this recording, actually, I realized, oh no, that's why you have the Master in the story. Okay, I get it now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I understand why they bloated this to 6 episodes. I think it works by the end. It's a similar thing to Earthshock, where it's like, by the end of the final episode, you're like, okay, yeah, that all came together.
Yeah, like it all, yeah. I think, I'm not sure, I can't think of any specific moments, but I might say, yeah, does it need to be 6 episodes? But given it's 6 episodes, it's pretty economic with its structure and its time management. I can't think of any major moment when I'm like, well, did that really have to be there?
Yeah.
For the most part. So yeah, I'd say that's pretty fair for the the use of structure. So
it has an 8.2 for acting.
Yeah.
That's about right.
They're all pretty good. Even the minor characters, they're pretty convincing.
Yeah, I do. It was amusing to me, the first on-screen death we see, how the character does what you'd almost describe as like a 50s melodrama death where the character like putting their hands over their mouth and screaming. Like that was
Yeah.
a bit weird, but that was the only moment where I was like, this seems dated. Everything else was fine. It has a 7.6 for effects.
Uh, yeah, I
I
mean, I
think I
think
think for Classic Who that could probably be higher, I think.
I'm actually kind of the opposite, because here's the thing. I'm a fan of Classic Who, of course, and I'm used to the fact that a lot of the special effects look dated nowadays. Um, but like, there are just certain shots, especially when the sea devils are coming out of the water, where it looks a little like pretty fake to me. It doesn't bother me terribly, but that's just something that stuck out to me. Having said that, I still stand by what I said at the beginning with the door melting. That looked pretty convincing, especially for early 70s. I mean, I think I know how they did it, but that it still was pretty good. Like that, honestly, in terms of the image of a door melting, that actually looked more convincing to me than in Earthshock when the Cybermen were trying to melt the door with a power lance. So
Yeah, I can see
kudos to
that.
them.
Well, I also I also want to highlight the miniatures used for the shots of the submarine underwater.
Oh
Like
yeah,
those were very, very good.
yeah, they were pretty good. And I like the fact that they use. I'm not sure. They might have been using stock footage for like the exterior shots of like
Yeah, well, I was going to
the
ask about this.
yeah.
And I suppose we'll bring it up now, even though we're in the middle of the points,
Mm,
basically.
yeah, yeah.
But like in the credits of every one of these episodes, it says special thanks to the Royal Navy, which I have to assume they were like, in terms of locations, like they were probably on a lot of naval war
Oh
vessels for
yeah,
filming.
yeah. That
Do
wouldn't
you
surprise me.
think do you think that a lot of that footage of uh, like the artillery, like, not those, not the torpedoes themselves, but like when they're hitting the water and we're getting the explosions out the water. Do you think that's stock footage, or do you think that they were like controlled explosions, like specifically for this episode? Because I couldn't tell. Like the footage definitely went a lot grainier, but you could probably attribute that to either it being older footage or it being we're in the middle of the ocean and we're grabbing these really quick because we only have one shot at this.
I want to say a combination of both, but it was probably more stock footage for almost all of those exterior shots of the ships firing the cannons and the explosions. Because if you look at the screen, you can kind of tell with the film stock, if you want to call it that they're using, where the exterior shots of the ship and the bongs exploding, they pretty clearly look like they've been using maybe, I don't know, like maybe 16 millimeter, or maybe it was 35 millimeter, but either way it's a film stock. But if you look at a lot of the exterior shots of just the characters walking around, they're going back to the old Doctor Who style of using it. It looks like old, um I think at that time, yeah, they would have been using videotape. And you can
Right.
tell there's a weird kind of look, so they would use for whatever reason in Classic Who for decades they would use 60 FPS um video for interior shots, and then they'd
Hmm.
use 24 roughly FPS for exterior shots. I don't know why they did that, and it does give it a really interesting, unique look, but I'm pretty sure they didn't stop doing that until I think it was not until Trial of a Time Lord they stopped doing that, and then they just used 60 FPS for everything. But you can kind of tell there's a difference even between those exterior shots and the shots of the bombs exploding in the ocean, and the guns being fired on the ships. Because even though, the BBC had, I imagine back then would have had budgets for small controlled explosions, which they clearly do, because there's that bit where the Sea Devil comes to the minefield.
Yes.
I can't imagine they would have had, such, a budget for such big controlled explosions, because most of those sorts of shots of, say, ships blowing up and things like that, it's clear they're using miniatures, and they've done that a lot in Doctor Who. So I'd say it probably would be stock footage. The Navy, I imagine, might have their own personal stock of videos of, I don't know, maybe bomb testing or something. I've got no idea, but um, yeah, the point is, I would say most of those shots are probably stock footage.
Okay, well, either way, like it wasn't very distracting when it went all grainy and like.
No, it was all pretty
Well,
convincing.
I had that
Convincing.
genuine confusion of whether it was stock footage or
Mm,
they did film it for this episode specifically. So like, well done for that.
yeah.
It has a 7.7 on replay value.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's just in terms of a plot thing. Like, I imagine that if you watch this back, you wouldn't like knowing what the plans of everyone are. It
yeah.
wouldn't. Nothing would contradict anything on a rewatch. It would all
Yeah, yeah,
still
yeah.
flow.
Yeah, it, it,
Um,
it it definitely would.
there
I've
are.
again,
I know you've got some last
so
5 minutes of episode 6 niggles that we'll get to.
yeah. But I definitely see what you mean. Yes, for the most part, it was actually a pretty enjoyable rewatch until, we get to that last episode. But before that, yeah, it was sort of better than I'd remembered it, and it
Hmm.
might just be because it's been ages since I'd seen it, but it was pretty good.
Mhm.
Um, the Again, it didn't feel like many minutes were being wasted. I liked the conundrums the characters got into. I liked some of the interactions between the Doctor and Joe, especially when she's helping him trying to escape. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah, I agree
And
with
the
that.
Master's always good fun.
14 out of 58 people say that this story has a prerequisite.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
would agree. I would tend to agree. I don't.
yeah.
I haven't seen Doctor Who and the Silurians, so I wasn't lost on that aspect.
Mm.
Like
Yeah, well,
they do a
they
good enough.
explain it pretty well.
They do a good enough job explaining it. I am wondering how similar the plot is in Doctor Who and the Silurians, where it's like the this colony of ancient reptilians have woken up and they want the planet back. I assume that's basically the plot of Doctor Who and the Silurians as well. So if you'd seen that one, you'd go, okay,
Basically, yeah.
this is familiar enough. This is just another colony of those people, sure.
Yes, basically.
Okay,
They're certainly meant to be like sequel episodes.
yeah.
Um,
Um, so like in that sense, I don't think you need to have seen Doctor Who and the Silurians. I do think you need a basic understanding of the Master and his relationship with the Doctor in order to really like understand their dynamic for a lot of it.
yeah.
Because it is kind of they do kind of go back and forth on being rather friendly and polite, and then just a whole ass sword fight in the middle.
Um, which is true. I mean, he does give a bit of an explanation about, you could say we were at school together once, but yeah, you probably need a bit of some more clues about that relationship. There is one more thing I want to talk about in terms of the continuity of it. Um, I am, I think the episode, so like it starts with the Master being imprisoned on this island, and I'd have to go back and probably watch again some of these earlier episodes again, but I think the circumstances to how he got on that island, they explain in a previous episode. I was just looking it up to find which one it was. I might very well be wrong here. I want to say it's Colony in Space, but I do remember, because I watched it a while ago, where the Master, yeah, he gets finally kidnapped and kind of, like, by unit and put on this island as a prisoner. But again, I would have to go back and take a look at that. But either way, that element of the Master just being there, you can clearly tell there's obviously a story that's gone on before that, because the Doctor says to him, you're lucky. I'm paraphrasing here, but he says basically that you're lucky you're just getting imprisoned.
Yeah,
So
I've just looked it up really quick. The story that the Master appeared in immediately previously to this one was the Demons or the
right,
Demons or whatever it is, and at the
demons,
end of that
demons.
one, he's captured by Unit.
Is that what it says?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yep. That makes sense. Yep. Um. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Because
Okay.
I think, yeah, because it was like I think, because I do have, I think I have the Demons on DVD anyway. But I think the plot of that is like the Master sort of runs this sort of like dark demonic cult, and he's bringing these aliens that look like, sort of satanic demons and on Earth, and he's trying to bring about a sort of apocalypse. So yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah. Um, at the moment it looks like the Sea Devils is the 10th highest rated Third Doctor story out of 25.
I mean,
It falls between the
I'd
daemons
believe it.
and the mind of evil.
Yeah, I guess I'd believe it. Um, sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
At about a 7.9, that's to be expected. It's nothing too
Yeah.
interesting
Yeah.
to talk about. Its ranking amongst Third Doctor stories.
Mhm.
And I think the last thing we do is the synopsis read.
Oh, yes.
Here we go. The Doctor and Joe visit the Master in his high-security prison on an island off the south coast of England and hear from the Governor, Colonel Trenchard, that ships have been mysteriously disappearing at sea. Investigating, the Doctor learns from Captain Hart, command of a nearby naval base, that the sinkings have centered around an abandoned sea fort. He and Joe then visit the fort and are attacked by what one of the men there terms a sea devil, an amphibious breed of the prehistoric creatures encountered by the Doctor shortly after his exile to Earth. The Master, aided by a misguided Trenchard, is stealing equipment from the naval base in order to build a machine to revive the Sea Devils from hibernation. The Doctor takes a diving bell down to the Sea Devils' underwater base to try and encourage peace. His efforts are frustrated by a depth charge attack ordered by a pompous politician, Walker, but in the confusion he manages to free a captured submarine and escape back to the surface. The Sea Devils then capture the naval base, and the Master has the Doctor taken back to their control center, where he forces him to help finish the machine. The Doctor sabotages the machine, and the two Time Lords escape together just as the base is destroyed in an explosion.
Yeah.
It is interesting how the classic TV serials, like I've noticed this, in the synopsis on them, it lists out the entire plot of the entire story, whereas for the Revive series, it only gives you like a
It's just,
two-sentence description
yeah.
of just like the setup.
Yeah, I was surprised, actually. I hadn't noticed that, but I thought, yeah, this synopsis is going on for a long time.
um, I suppose let's talk about specifics, and we'll save the end of episode 6
For
for
when
the
we
end
get
of the
to it, yeah,
discussion.
that's fine.
So this is the second Third Doctor story that I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
The first being the Three Doctors.
Ah, yes. Yeah, that makes sense.
And I've seen the Five Doctors as well, which the Third Doctor is also
Yeah,
in.
is also, yeah.
I think I may have said this before, like from the small amount I've seen him, but I think the John Pertwee is my favourite classic series Doctor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you've said it to me before, certainly.
Yeah. And watching this back, I was like, oh yeah, there's so many aspects of the Doctor that I love in this performance, in this portrayal.
Mm-hmm.
Like the way that he like commands the room as soon as he enters it. He lays it all out. He's not afraid of like, he doesn't give a damn what anyone thinks about him. Like he'll
that's
just
one
like,
of the more fun qualities.
yeah, like he'll just actively say to someone, yeah, I knew this historical figure, and then
Yeah, I
walk
was
out
friends
of a
with
room.
Horatio Nelson.
Yeah, I knew Horatio Nelson, and then he'll leave you with that. He'll walk out of the room. He won't like elaborate. And you can also kind of see the world-weary traveler in his eyes. Like that's,
Yeah.
it's weird. Like John, is it weird to say that John Pertwee is the Peter Capaldi of the classic era? Like even the outfits are very similar.
Ooh,
And as John Pertwee's era continues, his hair gets progressively floofier as well. Like there are so many similarities.
Yeah, I think, it's weird, but I think you once mentioned that Peter Capaldi's performance and really the writing of his character, he went from a kind of cranky grandpa to the fun uncle, and you said he was much better once he made that transformation.
Yeah, Peter Capaldi transitioned from William Hartnell to John Pertwee.
Well, that's the thing. I think John Pertwee, in a way, is kind of a combination of those two, because he does have the kind of the fun uncle part, but there are moments, not so much in this episode, but in other ones, he can get really cranky and short with people, and sometimes it can be quite disconcerting and borderline uncomfortable. So, yeah, that's just a thought. I think he's a combination of both of those qualities to an extent.
Yeah, I can see that. But yeah, I think I just really like the Doctor in this story. I think he's like I mentioned, like he has a lot of those moments where authority figures will question him, but then he'll have a conversation with them and he'll instantly change their minds. Like he does it with basically every single authority figure in this story, apart from Trenchard. Like even Walker, like he has that conversation with Walker, and then Walker's like, "Okay, fine, try and negotiate peace. Like I'm happy for you to do that." Whereas beforehand he was all about let's bomb the suckers. And I really like Joe in this story as well. I think she has a lot to do. Um, she has that entire episode where she's like out and about on the grounds and trying to free the Doctor. Like she does quite a lot in this story.
And I think, like, because after a certain point, she isn't given much to do, because obviously the Doctor's, down trying to talk to the Sea Devils, and he comes back up and then goes back down again, and she's mainly there, to obviously to reflect at the audience's concern. Is the Doctor going to be okay? How can you think of bombing the base while he's on there? That sort of thing. But when she does do stuff, it is really interesting, and I think it makes her like a really interesting and endearing character, and it's great that she's taking that active participating role in those moments. And I love the little when she's in the room trying to help the Doctor escape, he's kind of whispering to her, so you can see there's a bit of a shorthand that they've got, and I just love those really nice, nuanced little interactions, which is really great to see.
And there are a lot of moments in this that feel very similar to a lot of my favorite companion moments in Revived Who. Like there's the
Yeah,
scene where she's communicating at him through the window and she's using a lot of mime, and I'm like, well, this is Donna.
yeah,
This is exactly like the moment with Donna, except this time the Doctor can actually understand what she's trying to convey.
yeah. That I think I hadn't quite thought about that until you just mentioned it, but now that you do, yeah, there is a like you could those specific interactions you could transplant them onto a Revive 2 and it would still work quite well, which
Am I
is
right in
quite
saying
interesting.
that? Am I right in saying that Joe is the second longest serving classic companion besides Sarah Jane?
Um, that is a great question. I think she might be. Um, um, yeah, maybe, yeah, might be Jamie, actually. I would have to look that up. I think it would either be Joe or Jamie, but I'd have to take a look at that to be sure.
Because like a lot of their interactions in this episode, it's like, oh yeah, I believe that these guys are very good friends.
Yeah,
They like it's basically anytime that the Doctor sees Joe after he hasn't seen her in a while, like,
mm,
his face just lights up.
yeah, uh,
And also
yeah.
he fucks around with her like you would a really good friend as well. Like she gets served lunch, and then he's like, "This isn't a picnic," and then just starts eating her food.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up because here's the thing. That little interaction has two halves, and for me, just looking at this episode, especially in a modern lens, it is a bit sexist. Like he's
It
like
is.
oh yes, thank you, Joe. Let me do the explaining, and I'm like, "Ugh," okay, well,
Well, yeah, I mean,
unfortunate, but that's what we're doing. But again, like that's you expect that because this is
there
set in
are some
Doctor Who, and
70s isms, but
yeah,
that one, especially because he then like offers the sandwich to I forget what her name is,
um,
Blythe, I think,
yes, yeah, I think her name's
or something
Blythe.
similar to that. Like it
But
really
then
like that moment just comes across a lot more like I'm just fucking with my friend here.
yeah, well, again, I'm glad you mentioned that part because it then transitions from some like from pretty sexist, but like then just to more the Doctor's being a jerk, which that I'm
Yeah,
comfortable
yeah.
with, and that I can laugh at, because in those scenarios, and that's a perfect example with the sandwiches. It's obviously being done ironically. We know the Doctor's being a jerk, and they do it a
Especially
lot.
juxtaposing it with like the inherent sexism of Walker when he comes in as well.
Yeah,
Like the
yeah,
like what you mentioned, the like when is that girl getting back here with my tea thing,
yeah,
but the way he treats Blythe the entire time like she's a
yeah,
secretary, it's like, okay, they're setting you up to hate this guy, especially because he's going to be the one
yeah,
that tries to launch nukes later in
and
the story. But
and
also, like, the Doctor fucking with people is like a really... it happens a lot in this story as well. Like when
yeah,
he puts the golf ball blindfolded into the
oh yeah,
glass.
yeah.
Like he times that so perfectly to Trenchard coming back in. He knew what he was doing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think, like, and obviously the way he speaks to Joe, it does by any modern standards look icky. And I don't think, even if it's contrasted to the more sort of, I guess, obvious sexism of the parliamentarian, it's still icky regardless. But you can
Well,
tell
yeah.
there is more of a un underneath it or alongside it, I suppose, there's a more sincere, oh, I do really care about Joe, and then, we move on to just messing around with people as the Doctor tends to do. And again, the Doctor does that a lot. Uh, there are plenty of characters, both in the classic and, well, I think mainly in the classic, but also in the revived series, where he just kind of bullies people, like not like serious bullying, but just kind of makes fun of people. Like Harry, for instance, the Doctor friend that he meets in the first episode of the first Fourth Doctor episode, he bullies him a fair bit. He kind of makes fun of him and
Yeah.
puts him down for his only having knowledge as broad as a human can have, um and things like that. Like it reminded me, and I suppose you could maybe this is a bit of progress, but in the episode The Ark in Space, there's a bit where Sarah Jane, she's stuck in this little area and she's getting sort of deprived of oxygen, but they finally save her, and Harry tries to wake her up, and he just says, "Sarah Jane, come on, old girl," and then Sarah's like, "Harry, if you call me girl one more time, I'm going to spit in your eye," and then the Doctor's like, "Welcome back, Sarah Jane." So that whole those sorts of interactions with characters, that is part and parcel of the Doctor's character, and again, it works better in some cases than others.
Yeah. I feel like
but
it's gonna be something that's gonna happen in Classic Who, and we're just gonna have to
Oh yeah.
accept it
Oh
because
yeah.
it is a product of its time in that regard.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And
To be sure.
it's not like anyone on set was like, or involved in the production was like was trying to do anything genuinely harmful with that kind of stuff.
Yeah. 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 It's just yeah. And the fact is, again, um, he treats. Maybe there is like a sexist element in that he speaks to female companions like that, but again that it transitions to the Doctor just being a jerk. That's a part and parcel of their character.
Yeah.
That's throughout the whole series. He will mess with people, and I think that Doctor in particular, like the fact that there's a funny bit in I think the Green Death where he's got to sort of sneak onto this, I think it's like a power plant or something, and he's confronted by security, and they said, "We don't want to get rough with you, sir." Again, I'm paraphrasing, but but we're going to, physically restrain you. And he says, "Okay, but I'm quite spry for my age." And then he breaks out some of the Venusian kung fu, and then just kicks their asses, which is funny. But yeah, it's just a interesting interaction just to sort of to bring up, I suppose.
It's bizarre hearing the Doctor yell out something like "Akira."
Yeah.
I know he does it a lot, and it's gonna be an adjustment every time he does because, maybe don't give away your position. That's not.
Well, yeah, that's true. Well, and that's the thing you sort of bring on, that this is a very hands-on Doctor, a very sort of in the moment. Hey, guess what? I'm friends with Horatio Nelson. If you think that's weird, who cares? I'm gonna keep doing my thing.
You.
He likes to tinker around with mechanisms, like he does when he's sort of fixing that sort of radio transceiver. He he tinkers around with Bessie a lot, so he's a very, again, hands-on, in the moment,
Well, that aspect of
curious Doctor.
That aspect of the Third Doctor, in many ways, especially the physicality of him, it really sets up a lot of the revived series Doctors getting a bit more action-y as well.
Yeah, I'd agree.
But let's move on to the Master.
Yeah, sure.
I believe... Actually, no. I did want to bring up something before we moved on. The shot of the Doctor and Joe on the beach as he's using the sonic to blow up the landmines to scare off the Sea Devil. Yeah. I've seen that image a lot before. Isn't that one of those like classic Doctor Who images, like of the Doctor and Joe with the sonic? I feel like I've seen that a bunch.
Probably. I don't know if that specific photo from that episode is, but like the basic image of him with the sonic screwdriver, I'd say it probably is.
I do remember like a vivid image of the Doctor with Joe with the sonic on a beach, because like when that happened in the episode, I was like, oh, that's where it's from. I had that thought instantly, and then I was like, wait, is that a thing?
If it was, it wouldn't surprise me. I'm not aware of it personally myself, but again, it wouldn't surprise me.
Alright, onto the Master.
Yep.
I believe this is the first Roger Delgado Master performance that I've seen.
Yep.
I don't believe I've seen him as the Master previously to this. And I think he's the first Master, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It is bizarre seeing this Master compared to where the character will end up. Because like I had the thought immediately in my head in episode 6 of this story when the Doctor's like, oh, I was just going to go get the thing, and the Master's like, oh, don't worry, I'll go get it for you. I was like, he's so polite. And then I think to the most recent Master played by Sacha Dhawan and how he'll just like yell at everyone and like he's genuinely manic. It's like, Jesus Christ, how did we get here?
Well, it just kind of shows, different masters are like different doctors. There is going to be quite a wide variety of performance. I mean, by the time you get to the Deadly Assassin, for example, he's a guy in this sort of undead skull mask whose voice is muffled because he's wearing this mask, and he's a very different master. He's not really... There's no charisma. Incidentally, we really should watch The Deadly Assassin, because from memory, that was a really good episode, and anyway. But that's a completely different master. There's no charm or charisma there. He's just this kind of decrepit sort of monster. But it is interesting seeing the different kinds of masters, and in this version, I think he is very much, to an extent, playing up the sort of English gentleman aspect. Certainly when he's trying to manipulate his way out of situations, and that's even before he, breaks out the sort of Time Lord mind tricks with his weird hypnotism, which I just love, because that is such an early 70s Doctor Who thing to do.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, I remember seeing that the first time and going, what? But then I remembered, when the Master was first introduced in Season 3 of the Revived era with John Sim, and they were describing the Master to Martha and Jack, and like he goes on to like, he describes the Master as like very charming and charismatic and somewhat hypnotic, and that leads into the Archangel Network stuff, where like when they discover that like the Master's like telepathic signals in the phone lines, and the 10th Doctor's like, oh, I said he was hypnotic, didn't I? And I was like, holy crap, like, they got a lot right with the Master when they brought him back the first time. Like,
oh, yeah. You mean that bit where it's so funny, where they got Anne Widdecombe, who's an actual Conservative MP in the British Parliament, to stand next to John Sim and say, I'm voting for the Master this election, which incidentally is such a wonderfully BBC thing to do. It's like when they had, Jeremy Paxman on The Thick of It, or when they had Michael Parkinson and Craig Charles playing themselves in Ghostwatch. It's just... anyways, I'm sorry for that tangent, but that's just a really funny little quirk that I've always stuck in my mind.
Well,
but
in that same story, the Master is seen watching the Teletubbies on television, and then we get in this story where he's watching... I have no idea what the name of that program is. I want to say the Wombles, but it's not the Wombles. It's like the alien things, and like, and it's like, oh yeah, that's from that too. I found myself having like it's like reverse nostalgia, where the stuff the stuff that were callbacks in the newer episodes, I was watching the inspirations here and going, oh, it's like that other thing. They did a good job.
Yeah.
Wait, no, this came first. What am I saying?
Yeah. Well, it is interesting, and I don't doubt that a lot of that is due to sort of Russell T Davies being, a fan of the classic series and trying to work in all these wacky concepts and make them work more effectively. So that would make sense. But I'd forgotten that they do mention the sort of the hypnotic quality of the Master in the Revived series, but I'm glad you brought that up, because...
Well, it is something that they don't bring back in the Revived series. They did, like, I know there's a bunch of stuff the Master uses in the classic series that never gets brought up in the Revived series because of how remarkably 70s it is. I know that in Spyfall, the Master's tissue compression technology gets brought back.
Yes.
But like that, and that's like a one-off appearance of that, and then... But I don't think a lot of the stuff in the Master's old wheelhouse gets brought up again in the Revived series. And it's interesting seeing this Master with all these old tricks, but with a remarkably similar plan to something he would try and pull off
Well, yeah.
in
Yeah.
revived era Who. Just the idea of like, I want the Sea Devils to overthrow humanity just because you like them a bit.
Yeah. It's a very... it is very funny seeing that he'll go to such extreme lengths for something that seems almost petty.
Yeah,
It's like, oh, you really like this planet. I want to see it burn because I hate you. Having said that, if you sort of dig a bit deeper into it, it does make sense because, the Master knows, that would obviously really devastate the Doctor because he does care about Earth as much as he does.
yeah.
So,
No, it definitely goes beyond just being petty. It's like an act of
yeah,
revenge. It's
yeah,
a classic,
yeah.
like, moustache twiddling villain move, which I understand the Master kind of was.
Yeah, I think, especially at that point, even like you said, the mustache twiddling, but like even his design, like the way he looks like a very 70s British villain. He
Oh
looks,
yeah, yeah,
he looks even kind of older than that. He looks like like a 50s melodrama kind of villain.
yeah.
Plotting.
He looks like if you were making a live action Dudley Do Right, he would be the one you'd get as the villain of that. Like it's all the hallmarks are there. I really like this version of the character. I think he works for this story. It is interesting that the first bit of the episode, he very briefly tries to convince the Doctor, no, I'm reforming, I'm going good.
Yeah.
Which is something we would later see with Missy, but in a genuine way.
Mm.
And it was interesting seeing that, and then just it never gets brought up again. Again tries to convince him. It would have been interesting to have a Master story where he he commits to the charade for a bit longer, and then uses that to try and to get into a position like maybe he uses that ruse to break out of prison or like to be released from prison, and then he escapes. But
Mm.
no, it's just something that was there to tack onto a really rather good conversation between them in that first.
Mm.
It is so interesting, like seeing the companion like actively smile at the Master as they're leaving as well. Like no fear, no hatred, just like, well, it was nice chatting with you, person who's presumably
Yeah,
tried to kill me
that
and
was
my
a bit
entire
odd.
species on many occasions.
I don't know whether it's because, they just found it entertaining that the Master, is finally in a cage, but
Mm. Well, what is the Master Joe relationship at that point? Had they? I assume they'd met before. Have they had many conversations? Had he held her hostage many times? What was the go
I'm
there?
I'm not sure. I don't think they would have had many interactions. I think it's more just Master's here, gonna mess up the world, and Joe is obviously a part of that.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I'd have to investigate further into the question though.
Sure.
Yeah.
Um, I also find it like I was wondering in that first episode, like, are they gonna bring up the fact that they were childhood friends, or is that something that got added on in the revived series to like add a bit of new lore? But no, it was there, and it's something that I've always really liked about that dynamic between them.
Oh yeah.
It's way more interesting than just being, oh, I've heard about this bad Time Lord from my home planet. He did a bunch of bad shit. Guess he's doing shit here on Earth now too.
Yeah.
But no, having that established lore there, it it really makes any scene with just the two of them together just a twinge more tragic.
Yeah. And it's always really great. You love to see it when those
Yeah, yeah.
nuances creep in. Um,
I do find it interesting that the Master chose to manipulate Trenchard
mm,
through like traditional ways, like
mm,
claiming humanity's under attack from this hostile force.
mm,
I need your help.
mhm.
Whereas if I'm understanding the episode right, he very realistically could have used his hypnotism stuff.
That's the thing. I don't think he could have because Trenchard said um, the security team looking after him and presumably Trenchard himself had been trained to resist hypnotism.
Yeah, you see,
Although, no,
I,
actually, no, that was a ruse, wasn't it?
yeah,
Because they
that's what I was
worked
gonna say. I
together
was, I was under the impression that that was a lie because they were
yeah,
working
to
together.
get them.
Mm.
Yeah, no,
But
that makes
it's
sense.
entirely
Either way,
possible. It's entirely possible it wasn't a lie, and the reason that
yeah,
he resorted to traditional manipulation is
was
because his
because he
hypnosis
couldn't.
failed.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. They could have been in on it, but the security team might not have been. It could have been either. But I think it's sort of using that element of manipulating Trenchard through these whole, this is your duty, to your
Yeah.
country. I think it works well, and it ties in pretty well with the themes of the episode.
Well, it
Um,
ties in with the Sea Devils, like,
yeah,
very well, I think,
yeah,
because, like, they've also got their own ideologies.
yeah.
They're, they're, as with the Silurians,
Hmm.
they're also like, this was our planet, we want it back, there's no way the humans are going to negotiate.
Yeah, as the Doctor
Um,
said, man was just an ape that got ahead of himself.
yeah, yeah. And Trenchard also has that moral compass, and it's really a sad story with him. Like, the whole time he assumed that he was doing right by his planet, by his people, and
Hmm.
everything that he did was in service of that. It wasn't like he had some other ulterior motive. His like, it wasn't like, I'm going to lure these guys out of hiding and bomb them mercilessly, and then through that I'll get a promotion, and then I'll become, like, the top brass and get more
Hmm.
money. No, he just genuinely wanted to do
Hmm.
what he perceived to be the right thing, and he died for it, and it was really upsetting, actually.
And I think that's kind of contrasted to the private parliamentary secretary who's kind of doing it for the glory.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of showing two sides of the same coin, saying that these are both aspects of duty. I personally find them both troubling for sort of different reasons, but I think it is showing that one is certainly worse than the other in terms of motivations. But the whole idea of sort of mocking very British sensibilities about duty, about country, about that sort of especially sort of militaristic hierarchy. I think that's something that would crop up or does crop up a lot in British, even British fiction. I mean,
Yeah.
even going back to something like, the Pirates of Penzance, the whole conceit of that of that play is about the fact that the main character is um, compelled to do his duty, which anyway, but that element I think is a strong element in British fiction, and it certainly rears its head here. Um,
Yeah.
and that's why it was kind of important to thematically compare the motivations of Trenchard to the parliamentary secretary, because even though, yes, I have problems with both attitudes, but yes, in terms of intent, one is certainly more sincere than the other.
Well, you could say that, like, uh, Walker is one extreme, Trenchard is the other, and then Captain Hart is in the middle,
Yeah.
where he's like,
Um,
he has his own moral code and he'll stick to it, but, like,
yeah,
he is a soldier and he has it, and if he's ordered to do something, he's not going to like it, but that's what's got to
I
be done.
I guess you could say that, but I feel like I don't know. I feel like Hart is more kind of lenient and almost really in some ways less duty bound than Trenchard because he's more compliant with the Doctor. He
Yeah,
kind
yeah.
of helps to get things done. So I'm not sure if I'd say that Trenchard is between the two characters. But
Well,
they
yeah,
I think
it wasn't a great comparison, but
yeah.
there is a sliding scale between the three of them.
Yeah, and I think it's at the very least, though, it's interesting and kind of useful thematically to compare the three of them, how they interact with each other, what their um, sort of moral qualms are, and where their loyalties lie. So yeah, I think it's interesting to sort of compare them in that way. So yeah,
I think we should move on to talk about the Sea Devils themselves now.
yep.
I don't know how I feel about these, well, not recurring at the moment, but what will
Mm-hmm.
become recurring, villains being sort of given their official name by, like, a passerby.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I'm to understand it, the Silurians were also given their name erroneously by a
Yep.
human.
Mm-hmm.
And the Sea Devils here is the same thing. And the fact that they became their official names, like, the Doctor doesn't know what their
Mm.
species name is, I don't know how I feel about that. Because, like, even I think in future Silurian stories, Silurian stories, people who don't know, like, of that past stuff will call them Silurians. I guess maybe through units cataloging, that's just what their name became. It's just always been interesting for me that they don't have, like a proper species
Well,
name.
it's interesting because there's one more Silurian Sea Devil story after this, a Fifth Doctor story, Warriors of the Deep, which
Yes.
I'm pretty sure is actually rated to be one of the like worst Classic Who episodes.
Ah, well,
Um,
that's easily
and that
discoverable.
and it yeah, and it that episode is set on a I think, a human-controlled spaceship way off into the future. But the Doctor, I'm pretty sure, literally calls them the Sea Devils and the Silurians. So even then, yeah, it is a bit odd.
Oh yeah,
Um,
that episode does not have a good ranking. We'll get there.
oh, we definitely will. But yeah, it is interesting that you mentioned that because you do think would because I don't think the Doctor actively calls them Sea Devils. I think very much at all in this episode. But it is odd that again, if my memory of the Warriors of the Deep is correct, it is odd that the Fifth Doctor would just straight up say, "Yeah, the Silurians and the Sea Devils." It's a bit
Well, I
weird.
think at the start of when the Silurians are introduced in the 11th Doctor's tenure, he doesn't call them Silurians immediately. He mentions that they were called the Silurians by a group of people. But in the trailer for Legend of the Sea Devils, we can hear Jodie just saying the phrase "Sea
Sea Devil.
Devils."
Yeah.
Yeah, so like I don't know. We'll see how that ends up
Yeah.
playing out.
Well. Yeah.
You guys will hear about that next week. We've got 2 weeks to wait.
Oh boy.
I do find it interesting, and it's a really clever way to get around the prosthetics of Classic Who, where it's like,
Hmm.
you've got an aquatic monster, they're not going to blink. That's a good way of using the masks to good effect.
I'd never thought about that because they certainly don't mention that they wouldn't have to blink. I do think it's literally just yeah,
It's just
this
a happy,
weirdo
it's a
sort
happy
of
coincidence.
this weirdo sort of proto Ninja Turtle look that works. It's modern enough for
Yeah,
us.
it did lead to a funny moment where it's the moment where Joe's running around a corner, I think, and then the Sea Devils come around the corner and march right past her and don't see her. And at that moment, I was sort of thinking, come on, like, surely one of the advantages of having your eyes on either side
On
of
the
your
side
head
of
is
your
you have
head.
good peripheral vision.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it goes back to what I've said a couple of times now. That's just part and parcel of the
Yes.
visual language of Classic Who, and I love it for that reason. I love the weird cartoonish designs.
God knows it's been worse.
Oh yeah,
Even in New
yeah.
Who, that kind of stuff has been
Well,
annoying at times.
here's an interesting thing, and we will definitely get into this more when we talk about Legend of the Sea Devils. But I was astonished, utterly astonished that they kept the classic again proto Ninja Turtle Sea Devils look for the new
Yeah,
series.
and we mentioned this in our first episode as well, but yeah,
Yeah.
like that, it's so similar.
It's just so strange to look at because when you look at it um in the classic series there is a level of ridiculousness about it, but as I've said before, it's part of the fact that Classic Who is very much a weird cartoon of a show, and that goes into other stylistic elements with this episode but also with other episodes in Classic
But
Who.
also, like, we are kind of living in that era now. And that's a strange thing to say without me explaining it, but like, the comparison I draw to is like in modern superhero films when, like, in the past, when adapting a character's costume, they would take a lot of liberties and trying to make it, you know, come off the page, but still like look sensible. Nowadays, like, they're giving characters comic accurate costumes left, right, and center, and people shit their pants over it. So I kind of, in that way, it's kind of like it makes a lot of sense that they would try and keep as one-to-one with the old design as they could.
It's mainly interesting just to compare it to the way the Silurians are designed in
Yeah, yeah.
Revival Who. But here's the thing: I think I know why this. I don't think this was super deliberate, but I think I know why they did do that with the Silurians, but they kept the original design with the Sea Devils. It's because the original Silurian masks in the classic series are very expressionless. They look like
Yes.
weird sort of fish
They
masks.
look
You
awful.
you would not be able to tell, what their expressions are without the voices.
Yeah, and
Again,
in
that's
that
just the
first
limitations.
yeah, well, in that first two-part Silurian story of New Who especially, you kind of need them to have expressions because
Absolutely, because that's
it's a political drama, that
yeah,
episode.
it's it's just a modern show. It's a modern show with a modern style. You need to be able to understand their facial expressions. You need to see how they're feeling. But they couldn't do that with Classic Who because then that was just the technological
Yeah,
limitations that they had at the time. Now, that same argument is true with the Sea Devils, because if you look at these Sea Devil masks
absolutely.
in the episode The Sea Devils, don't express much at all. The only real emphasis of emotion you're going to get is through body movement and the voices. And of course, with a lot of Doctor Who monster voices, it's clearly been overdubbed with wacky special effects, and you have to kind of glean it off there. But the weird thing is, and I think this is sort of a combination of taking advantage and also just creative happenstance, where the original design of the Sea Devils is like, even by Doctor Who standards, it's very cartoonish. But what that means is, in a modern context, you can make an animatronic mask that has a surprisingly wide range of expressions, and we've seen it. They've got the moving and blinking eyes, the big wide mouths, and there's a lot you can do there. It's not like the fixed sort of stony masks of classic era Silurians. So again, through a weird combination of happenstance and creative ingenuity, they've gone with this more old-fashioned look for a modern Sea Devil, which again, very strange to see that. I was very surprised, but they seem to be making it work, or at least they certainly seem to be by all the trailers we've been given so far.
Well, yeah,
So,
it makes me wonder how much the Sea Devils are actually going to be, like, present in that episode, because we as of, like, 1 or 2 days ago, the trailer came out, and it was not at all what I was expecting it to be. Flying pirate ships, I'm so confused as to how that's going to work.
yeah, we'll see how that goes.
We'll see. I really like in this story how, like, for the first 2/3 of it, they are just portrayed as your standard invasion monster movie kind of monster creatures. Like, they don't talk at all in the first 4 episodes, and then right at the start of episode 5, like, launching into it, you get the conversation between the Doctor and the lead Sea Devil.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, like, no, these are people. Like,
Yeah.
The Doctor is very, very quickly able to convince them that, no, there's a chance we can negotiate a peace. And they're like, oh, well, if we can do that, then yeah, we'll definitely go for that.
And that was one of the reasons why I chose the episode, because it does have that kind of wonderful, meaty sort of ethical conundrums. And when I was a kid, there was one documentary which was made in the 70s. I think it was for Doctor Who's 10th anniversary. It was called Who's Doctor Who? And they talk about all these different scenes, and that specific conversation between the Doctor and the lead Sea Devil was part of it, and it's always stuck in my mind, because I thought, oh, what great dialogue, and what a great ethical conundrum to show the audience, that, the bit where, and that great devastating bit where the Doctor's like, the depths of the sea and the places where man cannot live can be yours. And then the Sea Devil just turns to him, faces him, and just says, and man would agree to that? And you know what? No, we probably wouldn't.
Probably
so
not,
it's really
no.
good that they're asking that question. So
Yeah.
it's for those reasons that I wanted to take a look at this episode, because for no other reason, I just think it's good and interesting that they're tackling these sorts of issues.
Yeah, I think it's for that reason is ultimately why the Master does work in this story, because as I was watching it, I was thinking, okay, the Master is there to make sure that the Sea Devils won't let the Doctor negotiate. But as that's happening, you've got Walker, if that's his name. Yeah, you got Walker dropping a torpedo on them. So you could have easily had that scene play out with, okay, we'll let you negotiate. What's that? They're bombing us? No, you're wrong. They won't negotiate. We're going to go ahead with our original plan. But I think you do need them to be sort of quasi-manipulated by the Master in order to, like, really play up the tragedy of their outcome and what happens to them, which, let's get into it.
Yes, there is also one other small element that I want to mention later about the breaks between episodes, the cliffhangers, but we'll get to that shortly. Okay.
Actually, we'll do that first, because this leads into something. When we finished recording the previous episode of this, The End of the World, we were talking briefly about the Sea Devils, and you mentioned 2 things to me specifically that I remember. You mentioned the cliffhangers, and you mentioned the ending of episode 6. Neither thing ended up being really that big of a problem for me. The cliffhangers were oddly placed because
Yeah, they were.
well, my main note on the cliffhangers is that if they had played out for a minute longer, you would have had far more compelling cliffhangers.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the weird thing, because I know you mentioned, I think it was either the last episode or no, I think it was Earthshock, that you
Yes.
talked about, you sometimes find the cliffhangers in Classic Who a bit frustrating because they'll often do a fake out where it's like, oh, there's a real threat, what's going to happen next, and then immediately resolve that threat. Like in the Sea Devils is a classic example when the Master throws a knife at the Doctor,
Yes.
and literally the next episode the knife just hits the wall.
Yeah.
Now that's fine with me. I'm comfortable with that. That's a classic part of Classic Who. It's one of the things you go to it for. And those weird sort of twists in plots, like you know what's going to happen. It is a bit formulaic, but it's still really interesting nonetheless. But what surprised me was how strange some of the cliffhangers were. In particular, I think it is the cliffhanger of episode 1, where this thing is coming to the Doctor and Joe down the hall. It's coming up to them, and then there's this weird pause, and then Joe just says it's coming towards us, and then the episode ends. Well, it would have made more sense in terms of normal Classic Who cliffhangers to have it go for a little bit longer, have the monster go up to maybe grab the Doctor, and then cut. Now
See,
again,
that one I didn't mind as much because it serves as a bait and switch, not
yeah.
so much it led to nothing. Because like what you assume it's a Sea Devil, and then
yeah,
it's
and
like,
then it
oh no,
turns out
it's
to be.
this guy. Oh, this guy survived. Oh, okay. It is with that guy.
Yeah.
Then never appears in the story again after they get off the fort. But whatever. The knife throwing one, if you would let that play out for a minute longer, ending on the Doctor being arrested, perfect cliffhanger.
Yeah, no, that's true. Actually,
And you might have been able to do that if you hadn't spent. It's so weird at the start of episode 3 that they choose to show the entire sword fight again, as opposed to just cutting to the Doctor putting the swords on the table, starting there and going, violence never solves anything, and then doing the knife throw then. You don't have to show the full 2-minute sword fight leading up to that moment.
That's probably, and I think I might have mentioned this too, but I think that's just part and parcel of being a multi-part BBC show in the 70s or the 80s, as it may be, because I think the idea is that, the people who are watching this episode, they probably didn't see last week. We need to make sure they understand everything that's happening here. So I think that's just part of it. However, you are quite right to point out there is a bit of awkwardness, in the placement of the cliffhanger.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, also in the last cliffhanger of the story, they're walking out of the Navy base, I think it is, and then they see a Sea Devil pointing the gun. The Doctor then immediately defeats both of them, is captured by a third, and then they're taken into the base again. That's where your cliffhanger goes. And maybe if you made the sword fight flashback a bit shorter, you would have been able to end that episode there instead. You've got your 25-minute stories. If you shave off a bit of the recap that doesn't mean anything, you have time to end the episodes in their appropriate places.
And these are, as I say, these are just part and parcel of the weird narrative flaws and sort of odd alleyways that Classic Who will go into. And it is, as I've perhaps mentioned, one of the reasons why I like the show, even in its more flawed moments. The fact that, sometimes they're blundering through, but at least they're trying to do something that's, fairly original and kind of interesting. So it doesn't... Those elements don't bother me terribly, but they are, I think, worthy of pointing out, especially if you're a person who's not used to Classic Who, because they can, having those strange narrative breaks and placing them where they are, they can be quite jarring if you're not used to it. Hell, I'm a fairly seasoned Classic Who veteran, and I found some of these cliffhangers jarring where they place them.
The one that leapt out at me the most, though, was episode 4's cliffhanger.
Mm-hmm.
You get Joe looking up into the capsule, and then it ends.
Yes.
And then the next episode begins with an extra 15 seconds of footage, and it ends with her saying, he's gone. That's where your cliffhanger goes!
Exactly. I completely forgotten about that, and I did want to mention it, though, when I was watching it. Again, even by Doctor Who standards, that's not where you put the cliffhanger, because we don't even 100% know what's going on. We don't know the context of what Joe's looking at. You can assume that the Doctor's missing But that I only assume that because again I've watched Classic Who quite a lot, and I assume okay, well he's probably still back with the Sea Devils, or he hasn't. Maybe he's lost at sea or something. But you don't really know that. It's not until Joe comes out of the capsule and says he's gone. But that line, that would be such a great place to leave a cliffhanger. Because it's
Yes.
like, here's the confirmation. It's like, oh no, she's looking in. What is she seeing? Is the Doctor dead? Has he been kidnapped? Is there a sea devil over there? What's happening? And then she comes in. He's gone. And it's like, oh, what's happened now? But yeah,
Putting the
it's so
cliffhanger where it was,
strange.
putting the cliffhanger where it was only would have made sense if there was something unexpected in the capsule.
Yeah,
Not if there's nothing, because the assumption
yeah,
is that there's nothing in there.
yeah. So yeah, it is strange. It is very strange that they did that. Again, even to me, that was quite jarring. I have to say. So
Okay, let's talk about the end of the story.
yes,
You've
the end.
already detailed how jarring you found it when you saw it again yesterday. You said
No, I saw it last week. I
last
watched
week.
it in a
Okay,
day, but yeah.
okay, right. Um, I think because you set it up the other week that it was kind of a jarring ending,
Mhm.
I wasn't as put off by it.
Mhm. Mhm.
To me, like, yes, it is the Doctor, killing these people
Mhm.
in order to save Earth.
Mhm.
Um, I will say that kind of thing isn't foreign to Doctor Who.
Mhm.
It's happened a bunch.
Mhm.
Like, we're about to see in a couple of weeks. We're about to see the Doctor destroy the Slovene with a missile. We're
Mhm.
going to see the Doctor destroy the Pyroviles by blowing up Vesuvius.
Mhm.
It is established in the show that if the world is genuinely in danger, he
Mhm.
is willing to go to that extreme.
Mhm.
And it's not like it is a genocide in this episode. They've firmly established that there are many,
Yeah.
many colonies of sea devils, and he's
Yeah.
like,
That
I,
haven't
I
been
was fully,
reawakened yet.
I was fully expecting and also the feedback from this bomb will also flood all of the other
Yeah.
colonies, like making
Yeah.
sure they can't rise up either.
Yeah.
Like and the key moment for me is the way that the scene plays out before that point, before the reveal of that, where the
Mhm.
Doctor says, "And you're sure there's no chance to negotiate?" And the Sea Devil says, "Yes." And at that point, you see the look on his
Mhm.
face, like, "Well, I guess I'm doing this then." And at that
Mhm.
point, he arms the device.
Mhm.
To me, that was like, okay, it's a bit extreme, but it's
Yeah.
in character.
Yeah.
He genuinely did do what he had to do to stop a war. And
Yeah.
it's not the same thing as the military men dropping a nuke, because at that point, it was unclear if there was a truce that could be reached. As soon as he gets the confirmation of, no, there is no chance of a negotiation, he's like, all right, then I'm doing this.
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
that's my perspective on the
Yeah.
episode.
Yeah.
Has that explanation... Like, how does that fit with your
Mhm.
philosophy?
It has changed it a little bit. Because I hadn't calculated that much about the fact that the Sea Devil. I'd actually kind of forgotten that the head Sea Devil says, "Yeah, there's no chance for peace now. We're just gonna." So, and again, it may be me misremembering both classic and revival Who. In fact, but that ending to me just felt really icky, and it's because he'd spent this whole story talking about how important peace is and how we should give peace a chance. And again, having all these great conflicts with the humans and the Sea Devils, and to see him kind of, I don't know. I get what you say when it seems like there wasn't much of a choice, but I feel like, man, I've got to believe that the Doctor could have found a better solution to this than that. And I get that, they had, it's a six-part story. They had a certain limit of time. They had to get, certain things of the story out of the way, but I just felt like, man, this feels like a betrayal of, all those great pro-peace instincts the Doctor has, especially when you consider what happened the last time the Doctor came across the Sea Devils / Silurians. Because I then went, and I think I sent you the clip.
You did send me that, yeah.
And when I saw that, because I tried to think, man, have I misremembered that episode too? How broken up was he the last time this happened? But no, I
He
saw it, and
was.
he was clearly broken up. He literally says a whole species of intelligent sentient creatures, and the Brigadiers just wipe them out, and he's clearly devastated. And then it just cuts to the end, which, by the way, I love that ending because it's such a sort of kick in the teeth for the audience. It's, I sort of love those things when that happens. So it was just kind
It
of
is. Look,
galling to see it happen. And
yeah,
I'm,
I'll
yeah,
admit that like I hadn't seen that clip before I watched this story, so not having the context, I was like, this is perfectly normal. What are you talking about? But like seeing it as a direct sequel to that other story, it is a little jarring. I do think there could have been at least a moment on the beach where it was like, so you, yeah, I didn't like it, but like,
yeah, to just yeah,
I did what I had to
just
do. Like the point, my philosophy on it is like because the Doctor has spent the entire story being like, you have to give it a chance, you have to try this. The fact that he does end up resorting to what he did should tell you, okay, there was no other way. And to me, like the harsh reality of like any conflict is that sometimes there is no peaceful outcome. Like as much as we would love to end all wars before they begin with just simple negotiation, that's not always going to happen, especially when you've got the Master whispering in someone's ear the whole time. Um, and to me, that's I've mentioned it briefly before, but that's why the Master works so well in the story. If the Master wasn't there, you could have negotiated a peace easily. Even after the torpedoes drop, it was possible. But because of his involvement and how far things had already come and him still like actively trying to make this happen,
yeah, and that the fact
there
that
was no outcome.
they would even try for that kind of thematic complexity, the Master's a key part of that because you would not have all these conflicts be as intense as they are without him whispering into the Sea Devil Eater's ear, which I'm glad you brought that up because it is true. I don't know, like I might sort of push back against the idea of saying, oh, well, there's always going to be casualties in war because I don't know, that just sounds kind of...
Yeah, that's not quite what I was trying to say.
Yeah, yeah, but... Yeah, fair enough. But I think you are right to point out that there are certainly a lot of scenarios where the Doctor, regardless of Doctor and regardless of series, is going to have to make these really uncomfortable sort of utilitarian decisions. But I feel like I don't know. I
It could
just I
have been
feel
hand it could have been handled a little better,
yeah,
but it wasn't jarringly bad when I saw it. Again, maybe if I had that context of Doctor Who and the Silurians, it might not be sitting there very well with me either. And maybe when we do go back and watch Doctor Who and the Silurians eventually, and we do get that full
yeah,
story, and then I might genuinely rewatch Sea Devils after we do Doctor Who and the Silurians, just to see if my opinions have changed. But as
yeah.
they stand right now, I'm kind of like, it was unfortunate. It was a tragic end for this colony of Sea Devils, but it's nowhere. It's not. It's happened before in the show. It's
And it
not.
would
It's
and it
it's
would happen
certainly not out
again.
of character.
Yeah, and I think because there are other examples, and again, I'd have to when we eventually watch and talk about these episodes, my memory will obviously be a bit fresher. But there are a lot of moments where the Doctor has to make these really tough decisions. So, for example, in Trial of a Time Lord, one of the reasons he's being tried by the Time Lords is because he's accused of genocide. There's a species of aliens called the Vervoids, and in the story itself is called Terror of the Vervoids. And I think the idea is that they're attacking Earth, but I think the Doctor has to make this really, really difficult utilitarian decision of deciding, who to save, and he saves Earth, and I think it's because I don't know, there weren't as many Vervoids versus the whole planet Earth or something like that, and he
Yeah,
makes
yeah,
that decision. But when he's being accused of this, he obviously feels really torn up and broken up by it, so
yeah.
it's not like
Well,
he's
it's
unfeeling about
if
that.
if this story was told in Revived Who, there would have been a coda at the end of the story where he's
Yeah,
like processing, you know,
yeah,
the whole thing. I think
yeah.
that is kind of an upsetting element of Classic Who is that sometimes they just sort of end their stories and then it legitimately is okay, moving on.
Yeah,
Because
they end them
I did hear
really quickly.
somewhere that like the story after Earthshock, the time that they mourn Adric is like is jarringly short,
Yeah, I think
and
it's
they just
time
sort of move
flight,
on
but yeah,
immediately.
from
Yeah, yeah.
from
Like
memory.
it is a like if I I get where you're coming from, it wasn't that big a problem for me.
Yeah, fair enough. I will also say, in terms of sort of those jarring endings, yeah, it's interesting that both Earthshock and Doctor Who and the Silurians has a really sudden ending, and I'm sure that's deliberate to, again, just sort of kick the audience in the teeth. But
Yeah.
it is kind of weird, really weird realizing that, oh, I'll be back, here next week, and we'll just go on another rollicking adventure with the Doctor, and we'll just move on. Brigadier commits genocide. Okay, let's move on from that. So that, yeah, that's a bit of a sort of a narrative quirk in, I think, classic Who. So overall, having considered your thoughts on it and my own thoughts, it is still pretty icky for me. I think what really got my goat at the end was the very, very end when the Doctor's standing on the beach with sort of his hands on his shoulders, with that sort of smarmy grin on his face, and then saying, I did what I had to do in the name of peace. And I'm like, I don't know, man, that kind of sounds like some unpleasant Ronald Reagan sort of stuff. And so I think it was mainly the tenor of the way he delivered that.
Yeah, like to me, it would have been as bad as you're describing if we hadn't seen him like confirm with the Sea Devils that peace wasn't
That it
possible.
wasn't the only. Yeah. I mean, sure.
I think maybe if you rewatch that one scene, like you'll be able to see on his face the moment he goes, "Okay,
Yeah, I mean, and you
fine."
could have even theoretically done with the fact that the army's gonna nuke this base. Um, you could have even done a thing where they are the ones who destroy the base, and the Doctor is obviously broken up about it. But if they did that, that would literally just be the exact ending as Doctor Who and the Silurians, as
Mm.
thematically consistent as that would have been kind
Well,
of old hat. It's like we've already been here.
it's an interesting quirk of the Doctor's philosophy. I'm just now recalling the end of the Runaway Bride. And there are several moments like this in Revived Who where the Doctor especially specifically says something like, "I'm going to give you this one chance. What
Oh
happens
yeah,
next is on you."
yeah,
Like he offers the Rachnos.
yeah.
Like
One chance to
he says like you can leave and
yeah,
nothing. You can leave right now. Leave this planet in peace. She says no, and he says, "Okay, I'm gonna drown your children then."
yeah. And
Like it's an interesting philosophy. It's kind of like it's bizarre, like the end of Batman Begins, where like he's got the villain on the train, and he's like, "You're not going to kill me." He's like, "True, but I'm not going to save you."
yeah,
It's that kind of philosophy where it's like
yeah. It's
you gave them the opportunity to be the bigger person, and once there's no opportunity for change, you're a lost cause.
as I said in the last episode, the man who keeps running. It's about
Yes.
and it doesn't even Davros in that episode say, you're a sort of person who sort of lets the tragedy happen for you. You don't pull the trigger yourself, but you just sort of let horrible stuff happen. But that I think is a key component to the Doctor's moral complexities. And again, they do it better in some episodes than others. So I'll bring in the example that I actually talked to you about right after we'd finished recording the last episode. And again, I'm gonna have to go back and watch this episode again. But in the episode, The Dominators, um, the actually, sorry, no, I'm gonna backtrack even further. Pardon me. I mentioned to you after we'd recorded that episode the YouTuber Davis, who does a lot of Doctor Who content, and
Yes.
it's quite good. And he made this really funny video of ranking the Doctors from most Tory to least Tory, and it
Yeah.
is a very, very funny video, which I recommend you and most of the people, well, all the people really listening to take a look at, because it's pretty funny. But Patrick Troughton came about a third of the way in, and and he mentions the fact that there's a bit in the, I think it's the Dominators, the episodes with the quarks, the little box things with the crystals on their head. There's a bit at the end where the Doctor basically plants a bomb on a fleeing spaceship, and then Davis shows a clip of the ship exploding, and then does this funny little Patrick Troughton impression where he's like, "Oh crumbs, I think I've just committed a war crime, Jamie." So
Yeah.
that element of how much sort of power and how much decision does the Doctor have in these final choices, that is an important component, and I think it is safe to say it's handled better in some episodes than others, because even in Arachnids in the UK, isn't there like an argument that like Jodie Whittaker's Doctor kind of sort of does commit genocide by kind of destroying these spiders when she didn't really have to?
She 100% makes the wrong choice, but I don't think it's for
Yeah.
that reason. We'll get there eventually.
We will. But either way, the point is it's good that they do take these risks by exploring these really serious complex themes. But I think certainly for me, in terms of the content and certainly in terms of the tone and the tenor that they're trying to sort of stick the landings with these things on, I think this episode for me shows that it's done better in some episodes than others. And I think, again, for me, what was really galling was just that last image of the Doctor. Like, and that element is given, like, I don't know, like 30 seconds for us to process. It's like, yep, he's there, hands on his shoulder saying, I did what I did in the name of peace. And then we just kind of have to...
I don't remember him smiling when he said that line specifically. I think, if I'm remembering it correctly, that line he does drop his tenor a bit, and he's like, yeah it sucks, but like, if there was going to be a war.
True, fair enough. But there's just something about that it was so kind of palpable to me at the time that I'd forgotten that the Sea Devil leader had said, this is, we are going to go ahead with our plan. There's no chance for peace at this point.
It's interesting that I'm realizing now that is a philosophy of the Doctor. That philosophy of the Doctor is what's tested by the Time War. Like when he destroys the Daleks and his own people, like that is that aspect of that character's philosophy taken to its ridiculous extreme, where it's like, I'm going to destroy 2 entire species in order to save the entire universe. And I think it's fair. It's pretty fair that moment of decision making by him, a decision he's made countless times, but when it's made on that grand a scale, it's fair that breaks him to a certain degree.
Yeah, and again, these are the questions that kind of crop up again and again. In The Evil of the Daleks, which unfortunately it's a lost episode, but I have the recording of it. I used to listen to it a lot as a kid. But there's a bit where they're all trapped on Skaro in a Dalek prison, and the Doctor literally says to the companions, I'm slightly paraphrasing here, but he says, I wouldn't sacrifice the Earth even if they offered me all the lives in this room. So it's those kind of greater good, harsh decisions that the Doctor just kind of has to make in those scenarios. But I think, again, for me, I think this episode shows that they have to be very careful with how they thread that sort of thematically and narratively speaking to make it really sort of resonate and hit home. Having said that, yes, I will concede my judgments on it are perhaps not as harsh as my initial reaction to it.
Well, again, it might just be because I haven't seen the story that this is a sequel to. And, time will tell which of us is really correct about this ending.
Yeah.
But
we will have to wait and see.
I think this has been our longest discussion so far. Like we're close to 90 minutes now. This is
we're coming up to 1 hour and 24 minutes as of now.
Yeah, it's probably the most philosophical we've gotten as well. That's interesting.
Yeah.
But do you want to
most
give
of it was mainly talking about the episodes and stuff. But anyway.
Yeah. Do you want to give your official score for this episode?
Yeah. Okay. So, having seen the episode now, rewatched it, and having discussed it with you, there was a period even before we started doing the podcast where, again, the ending was so sort of bitter for me. I probably would have almost gone with maybe a 4 or a 5, but now I'm probably going to go with a 6 for me at the moment. Again, I don't know, maybe my thoughts on it might change in the future if we watch Doctor Who and the Sailor-Ins again and I put it all together, but certainly at the moment I'm going to go with a 6.
So as it turns out, this story does have a good replay value because you don't know what you think about it after like even a 5th viewing. That's in... The more you watch it, the more you change, good or bad. Who can say? I'm gonna land on an 8 for me so far. I genuinely enjoyed this story quite a lot.
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
has a lot of elements that I really enjoyed. One thing I didn't get a chance to mention before is how
Yeah.
much like Revived Who it did feel. I'm not sure what it was, but like I think what it was is a lot of the shots from the ocean, like even
Mm.
not even the stock footage stuff, but when they're like on the boat and like
Yeah.
all the shots of them, it's like
Mm.
the scale felt a lot grander than even something
Yeah.
like Earthshock, which is by far a more pivotal episode
Yeah. Because, yeah.
in
The
the
Earth stakes
story's
were a lot.
run. Yeah, but like the fact that they probably had quite a bigger budget for this one because of the Navy's backing,
Well,
and
yeah.
that aspect of it made it feel a lot grander. So when it gets to episode 6, I found myself like I was genuinely tense for a lot of the
Yeah.
back third of this story. Where I was like, I mean, I know what the outcome is because you
Yeah.
alluded to it, but like, damn, I'm actually really feeling the stakes here. Like it
Yeah.
did it. I think it affected me kind of physically in some way.
Yeah. No, I'd agree with that, and I think that the idea of it, of the scale of it, I think it probably was just due to the fact that they did it with cooperation with the Navy.
Yeah,
I suspect because the BBC, a state-run media corporation, that's again almost certainly the reason why they were able to get onto these sort of Navy settings and film there. But either way, it just goes back to what I've often said with Doctor Who, where yes, you can clearly tell the budget's low, but a lot of times, because of those restrictions, there's a lot of interesting areas for innovation, and this is one of the examples of it. The fact that they were able to up the scale and go to this location and take advantage of the specific context they're working in, that's one of the reasons why Classic Who is so fascinating to me. And they do it not just with this, but with a lot of other situations too. So it's really good that they did kind of up the scale because I think even from memory, Doctor Who and the Silurians, for example, I think that's a seven-parter, and it wasn't as big
jeez.
as this was, and that includes the fact that I don't think it felt as grand as this one did, and that includes the fact that again, the episode ends with massive on-site bombing of this area. I think a lot of it, is set in BBC sets. There's like a couple of exterior bits where a guy's sort of, I think he's getting stricken with some disease and he's running for a train, but most of it is either like at Unit HQ, in the Silurian base, or in the Doctor's office, or I think in the TARDIS. But I think yeah, by taking advantage of those exterior locations, I think they were able to make it quite a bit grander, and they used that to good effect, and good for them, honestly.
Is this
It
also the biggest discrepancy between our scoring so far?
Yeah. Oh
Like
yeah,
it's only by two, but like
yeah. That's still
yeah,
considerable, especially given we don't do anything by halves. So yeah.
yeah. I'm just waiting for the one episode that one of us loves and one of us loathes.
Oh boy, I don't doubt we're gonna get to those episodes.
Yep, I know it's going
Um.
to happen on Twice Upon a Time, but it's
Oh.
going to be interesting when it happens first.
Yeah, it will be, and I have to say, and I think I might have mentioned this in the first episode of our podcast, but this episode just shows that one of the reasons I'm glad we're doing this is because I have probably changed over the last few years, last decade, or however long it's been since I was watching Doctor Who regularly, and the fact is, if I'm, wrong, or even if it's not necessarily a question of me being wrong, if it's simply a question of my perspective changing on an episode, whether it's classic or revival, I want to know what that is.
Yeah,
If there's an episode that I used to hate from revival that I really enjoy, I want to know it. If there's an episode from classic Who series that I used to love that I don't like anymore, I want to know it too. The point is, there's nothing wrong with admitting that you're wrong, and I'm curious more than anything. I'm really interested to see how I've changed, I
yeah.
suppose, as a viewer over the
And I'm glad
last
we've got
several years.
and I'm glad we've got all of you coming on this journey with us, all you listeners,
Timey-wimey journey
who
through
I'm
time and space.
yeah, who I'm our listeners who I'm sure at this point number in the thousands. I'll genuinely be surprised if we crack 10.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Okay, I
Yeah.
think that's the end of our discussion on the Sea Devils. Next time,
Yep.
we'll be talking about the Sea Devils, specifically Legend of the Sea Devils from the year 2022. It's going to be our first time looking at a current episode as of recording. It's going to be interesting.
Yes, it will. Oh, yes, it will.
It's our first Chibnall discussion as well.
uh,
What fun we'll have.
ah,
What's the most recent Chibnall episode you've seen as of this recording?
first part of Flux.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so,
That was enough for you? You didn't decide to continue that season?
yep, pretty much.
Great. Awesome. It'd be so great you jumping into this with zero context, if there is any. Alright, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Two Who's Review. I'm Alex.
I'm Fitz.
And, catch you next time, champs.
See you later, timey-wimey adventurers.
That's both of our official outros. We're going to end every episode exactly that way from now on.
Oh, God.